Jeffrey Dahmer. Who was the infamous Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster? He was an American serial killer and sex offender who committed the murder and dismemberment of 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on May 21, 1960 to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. Joyce Dahmer, Jeffrey's mom, was a hypochondriac who also suffered from mental illnesses. Joyce's fear of contracting diseases inhibited her parenting skills. Jeffrey's father claimed Joyce was far from the ideal mom. He alleged that she was on prescription drugs while pregnant with Jeffrey and became mentally unstable after she gave birth to him. Joyce claims Lionel was busy with his own doctoral studies. He was often absent from the home. Nonetheless, Jeffrey being witness to the side effects his mother suffered from after starting anti-anxiety medication, along with abandonment issues stemming from his parents that largely left him fending for himself, would take a toll on any child. Jeffrey's brother came along when Jeffrey was 5 years old. Throughout childhood, Jeffrey resented him because he seen him as a competitor for their parents' scant attention. Between the time Jeffrey was 6 and 8 years old, his family frequently moved, before finally settling in Bath, Ohio, where Jeffrey lived until he graduated from high school. A 2005 study published in the Journal of Police and Criminal Psychology found childhood abuse, including physical, sexual, and psychological abuse, was present in the history of a high percentage of those people who grew up to become serial killers. When it comes to Jeffrey Dahmer, his case is a little unique in that his father wrote a book about raising his son and the problems he saw from a young age. In interviews his parents gave after his arrest, they described Dahmer as a toddler. He was a happy young boy who loved animals and nature. But things started changing when Dahmer was just 4 years old and had surgery to repair a double hernia. Afterwards, he became convinced his genitals had been removed. His father had suggested this was connected to his later habit of castrating his victims, and he also pointed the finger at other elements of his son's childhood that may have had some severely negative impacts on him. Growing up, Jeffrey was always fascinated with dead things. Dahmer started collecting insects and butterflies as a kid, then moved on to collecting roadkill, always keeping carcasses in jars after dismembering them, out of the fascination with how the pieces fit together. Eventually, Jeffrey got into taxidermy as a leisure activity. In attempts to bond with his son, Jeffrey's father unknowingly taught him how to preserve his victims. At 8 years old, during a chicken dinner with family, Dahmer expressed a curiosity to his father of how to bleach the bones of the chicken. His father, being a chemist, was proud of his son's scientific curiosity, so he showed him how to safely bleach and later preserve the bones. His father was unaware of what he had started, or that the methods he taught Jeff would be used for much more sinister purposes in Dahmer's future. The unusual hobby wasn't about a love for gore, it was practiced out of an interest in science. Dahmer's father, Lionel Dahmer, was a research chemist. The bone bleaching was an extension of his professional expertise. Jeffrey Dahmer may have fallen somewhere on the autistic spectrum. According to Listland, Dahmer was socially awkward, had a limited spectrum of facial expressions, had obsessive interest, and appeared stiff and mechanical-like in the way he carried himself. Due to these characteristics, some professionals thought he might have had Asperger's. According to Louis Schlesinger, a professor of psychology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and an expert on serial sexual murder, none of that information correlates to Dahmer's killing spree. Lots of people have conflicts with their brothers and sisters, says Schlesinger. Having your mother attempted suicide and become hospitalized is not a pleasant event, but it does not make you become a serial killer. That said, Schlesinger acknowledges that there are childhood and adolescent behaviors that do correlate with the development of a serial sexual murderer, starting with a preoccupying sadistic fantasy and a compulsion to act on it. When you do something like Dahmer did, you don't just one day do it, explains Schlesinger. It begins in the mind. Wallstrom says that as an early adolescent, Dahmer had an off the charge libido and constant fantasies about doing harm, more specifically killing men and having sex with their corpses. It took up to two-thirds of his day. Wallstrom says Dahmer told him at age 13, Dahmer tried to actualize what was in his imagination. He became overcome with lust for a male jogger in his hometown of Bath, Ohio, and so one day hid with a baseball bat near the jogger's route, hoping to make his first kill. But Dahmer told Wallstrom the man didn't go jogging that day, so he moved on. He was a very disturbed kid and adolescent, Wallstrom says. He was very isolated from the people around him. Another strong correlate to serial sexual murderers is animal cruelty. That's clear in his case, Schlesinger says, noting that as a teenager, Dahmer had impaled a dog's head on a stick in the forest behind his house. But for Wallstrom, the most striking anecdote Dahmer shared about animal cruelty dates from grade school. He'd gotten this tadpole and brought it in to his teacher, and the teacher ended up giving it away to another kid. Dahmer became so mad, he went to the student's house after school and took the tadpole out of his aquarium. He then went down to the riverside with the tadpoles in a small jar and poured gasoline into the jar before setting it on fire. But while animal cruelty is often a component of serial sexual murderers, the strongest correlate, says Schlesinger, is the murderer himself having been a victim of childhood abuse. That's the point Wallstrom says that Dahmer denies. Wallstrom believes he had very loving parents, and that blaming his parents for these issues was completely off the mark. Wallstrom, who also interviewed Dahmer's friends and family members for the killer's psychiatric evaluation, which he provided to the defense, said he didn't hear or observe anything to contradict the claim of a relatively peaceful family home. Although his mother suffered with mental health issues, Wallstrom says he thinks she was a loving mother. She had the 1 year baby book with locks of his hair and lots of pictures, says Wallstrom. His parents seem in the broad range of normal. Dahmer struggled with alcoholism from a very young age. He attended Revere High School in Richfield, Ohio, where he participated in extracurricular activities such as tennis and band. His teachers observed him to be polite and highly intelligent. His classmates, however, were a bit disturbed by the way he would smuggle alcohol into the building from the age of 14 inside his jacket and would keep it in the locker to drink before, during, and after school. When classmates asked him why he was drinking gin in class, he called it his medicine. Jeffrey was deemed as a class clown in high school by many of his classmates. He was socially awkward, sure, but he gained the attention and appreciation of some of his classmates with his odd sense of humor, often staging pranks and imitating epileptic seizures and cerebral palsy to entertain himself and others. This behavior became known as doing the Dahmer. Dahmer's first murder occurred just weeks after high school graduation. Dahmer's parents divorced early in 1978. His father moved out of the family house into a hotel room just a couple months before his mother gained custody of their youngest son, who also moved out to live with family elsewhere, leaving Jeff in the house by himself at 18 years old. On June 18, 1978, Dahmer invited 18-year-old hitchhiker Stephen Hicks to his home for a night of music and alcohol. Several hours later, Hicks thanked Dahmer for his hospitality and was ready to leave. Dahmer didn't want to go, so he struck Hicks over the head with a dumbbell, knocking him unconscious before proceeding to strangle him with the bar of the dumbbell and kill him. Dahmer then stripped Hicks of his clothes and masturbated over his dead body. Dahmer then discreted Hicks' body in the crawl space under his home and disposed of the remains in a shallow grave in his backyard. Several weeks later, he dug up the remains and stripped the flesh from the bones with acid and flushed the acid down the toilets, smashed the bones with a sledgehammer, and scattered them in the woods behind his family home. Is this crazy or not? So Dahmer's father actually realized he was living alone 3 months in and then decided, hey, we got to make a plan for you. So he enrolled Dahmer into Ohio State University to major in business. And he ended up dropping out 3 months in his first semester due to alcoholism. His dad was just so enraged that he enlisted him into the army. So in 1978, Dahmer trained as a medical specialist at the Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. He served as a combat medic in 2nd Battalion 60th, actually no, I was wrong, 68th Armored Regiment and the 8th Infantry Division in West Germany. Two soldiers claimed during this time of service that they were raped by Dahmer. However, of all the things, it was his alcoholism that had him deemed unsuitable for military service, and he was discharged from the army in March of 1981. 2 weeks after returning home to live with his father, Dahmer was arrested for drunk and disorderly conduct. His father no longer knew how to help him, so he sent him to live with his grandma in West Allis, Wisconsin, in hopes that her positive influence would help sober him up and get his life in order. However, his drinking never subsided, and a few months later, Dahmer was arrested for indecent exposure on August 7, 1982, for exposing himself to a group of women and children at the park near his grandma's home. He spent the majority of the next few years unemployed until he gained employment at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory. He kept a male mannequin in his closet. Yup, a male mannequin. Dahmer stole a mannequin from a store and used it as a prop for sexual stimulation until his grandma found it stored in his closet and made him get rid of it. He did not enjoy having sex with consenting partners because they moved too much. While having sex with men he met at gay bars and bar houses, he became frustrated with the way his partners moved during sex. So he started lacing their drinks with sedatives and raping them while they were unconscious. After several complaints from victims, Dahmer lost his membership at the bar houses, so he just started renting hotel rooms to continue his disgusting behavior. During this period, Dahmer also tried to steal a corpse once. In 1986, Dahmer read an obituary in a newspaper for a recently deceased 18-year-old man and later admitted to attempting to dig up his grave to steal his corpse, but the ground was too hard, so he quickly gave up. In 1986, Dahmer was arrested for masturbating in front of two 12-year-old boys and was charged with indecent exposure, but he claimed he was simply urinating, so the charge was changed to disorderly conduct. What? Dahmer had a routine for how he lured, murdered, and disposed of or kept body parts of his victims. For the most part, Dahmer followed the same procedure with his victims. He would lure them to his home with offers of money for sex or money for private photo shoots. He would drug, rape, and kill his male victims, not always in that order. He would sever the limbs and the heads from the torso, remove the bones from the body by either using acid or by simply cutting the flesh from the bone. Then he would dissolve all remaining flesh and dispose of it. Then he would either smash the bones with a sledgehammer and scatter or discard of them. However, Dahmer almost always kept the skulls of his victims. According to the journal Times, Dahmer stated, "It's my way of remembering their appearances, their physical beauty. If I couldn't keep them there with me, I could keep their skeletons." Dahmer sometimes preserved full body parts of victims. On some occasions, when he found particular victims exceptionally attractive, he would preserve the entire head, hands, penis, or other body parts in jars of solutions. Dahmer was also into cannibalism, so he mostly ate the hearts, biceps, livers, or other parts of the flesh of the legs of his victims. 9 years after his first murder, Dahmer claimed his next victim. Following this attack, Dahmer continued to kill sporadically. Dahmer committed 2 murders in 1988, one in the early part of 1989. Dahmer commonly picked up his victims in gay bars, drugged them, and then savagely murdered them. Dahmer has a psychotic post-humorous ritual, would often keep his victims' body parts or skulls in his apartment refrigerator. Jeffrey Dahmer picked up his murdering pace in the early 1990s, using his own residence as a central hub for his devastation. Jeffrey Dahmer averaged one murder a week during the summer of 1991. On July 22nd, 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer lured another potential victim by the name of Tracy Edwards into his Milwaukee apartment. Based on the would-be victim's testimony, Dahmer struggled in subduing Edwards. With a large butcher knife in hand, Dahmer forced Edwards into the bathroom, where the prospective victim saw pictures of mangled bodies and acknowledged terrible smells coming from barrels that were strewn throughout the room. Edwards, in a state of panic, kicked Jeffrey Dahmer in the stomach and sprinted out into the street, where he eventually waved down a police car. Edwards brought the officers back to Dahmer's apartment, where a search revealed gruesome displays of murder and torture. Severed heads, photographs of murdered victims, and human remains were in Dahmer's refrigerator, as well as throughout the entire apartment. What was the drug Jeffrey Dahmer used on his victims? So Dahmer used halcyon, a sedative that contains the drug triazolium, to incapacitate his victims. Dahmer was prescribed Halcyon, a medication often used to treat insomnia by physicians using sleeping issues from his job at the Milwaukee Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, where he worked at a graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 6 days a week, according to the study by the New School Psychology Bulletin. A study by Margaret University also reported that Dahmer told law enforcement officials that he would crush the medication and add the powder to his victims' drinks before assaulting them. Dahmer would often grind the sedative and put the powder in a glass before he left his apartment to search for victims, so the drink would be ready when he returned home. How did Jeffrey Dahmer die in jail? So, Dahmer was murdered by an inmate in jail, Christopher Scarver, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia and serving a life sentence of his own for a 1990 murder. But the thing about it is, Dahmer came into prison and started doing pranks by placing food onto chairs and people while inmates actually sat on them by accident. The guy came up to him earlier and told him, "I do not appreciate your jokes." Him having schizophrenia, he was not allowed to interact a lot with the outside world, therefore, not knowing why inmates came into the prison or the reason why they were admitted. For that simple fact, he somehow got hold of a newspaper article explaining why Dahmer ended up in prison, and that really frustrated him. Ultimately, at another time, whilst cleaning, Dahmer, with an inmate by the name of Jesse Anderson, was beaten to death with a metal bar. And this was because Christopher Scarver claimed that God told him to do it. What a way to get revenge. So Dahmer was caught on July 22nd, 1991, and he actually died in prison on November 28th, 1994. So I'm going to give my 2 cents here and state that Jeffrey Dahmer could have been caught way sooner than he was caught. So I'm just going to talk about the instances that were brought to the police and no one dealt with it. We'll start from youth. We can look at when he was in the army. There were two men who accused him of rape. One of those men were his roommates. That man had gone to the authorities at his barracks in hope to get help, but the guys who he reported the issue to claimed that he was pussy, did not help him, and the only reason that he even got help was because Dahmer got discharged because of his drinking issue. So we have a case right there. We have the case when he comes back home from the army and he lives with his dad, and he states that he was just beating his meat, or actually, my bad, he was peeing, but in reality, he was beating his meat at a fair. Then we also see him go to live with his grandma, where I believe from This is me after watching the documentary itself on Netflix. It appears that the grandma may have known a little bit more than it's showing us. And I also get that because I'm not too sure if in the Netflix series they were trying to portray that that head that was in that box was something that, she was really unaware of. Next thing she had a spare key and had already opened it up. That's why she was telling him to look in the box. Or what if she walked downstairs? I mean, if you live in your own house for all these years, like why would you be afraid now after so many years to walk down into the basement of your own house? Um, Other signs would have been when he spoke to his dad earlier on before he even, and this was after he committed his first murder, before he went to Ohio State, he told his dad he's having bad thoughts, and his dad just kind of like rolled over his conversation and suggested that he go to college because that would make him normal by just putting him to the system. Um, we've also had the guy who escaped. So there was a guy who got some help from him because he needed a jump start. So he went with him to his grandma's house, and the guy does not drink. He accepted a coffee, and if it were for, Jeffrey's Dahmer grandma insisting she's going to wait with this young man until he wakes up, I don't believe he would be here today. Now, this guy did go to the police, but because there was really no proof of anything else, they decided to take the word of a white guy who've already been to prison versus a black guy who did not even have a record and does not drink or do drugs. Again, it's the time, so these are one of those things that could have possibly stopped the situation right there. Before we had, I think it was probably a murder of 9 or 8 people in 1991. And then finally, I would say definitely Glenda Cleveland. So Dahmer's neighbor. So according to reports back in 1991, months before Jeffrey Dahmer's arrest, Glenda had apparently reported Dahmer after her teenage daughter saw something strange happening with the neighbor. So Glenda's teenage daughter Sandra Smith and teenage niece Nicole Childress allegedly saw a young boy running away from Dahmer in the alleyway on the morning of May 27, 1991, and the boy was bleeding incoherently, so he was not being responsive at all. So Glenda reported the incident to the authorities right away, but the authorities did not look into the situation enough. So the police came onto scene, and as they stated, we try to give the policeman our names, but he just told us butt out. I couldn't understand why he didn't want our names. I said, "What are you going to do about this? This is a boy." And the police was convinced by Dahmer that the boy was his lover who was just too drunk, and the authorities allegedly believed that. So this actually happened to be a 14-year-old boy who was drug assaulted and injected with hydrochloric acid by Dahmer, which is why he couldn't respond whilst people were in front of him. But the crazy part is the police left him with Dahmer, did not do an ID check on him, and the only proof that they used to say that he should have been there was pictures which Dahmer had taken earlier while he was assaulting the boy. So Cleveland tried hard to convince the authorities, but Dahmer managed to wiggle out of the situation, and he went on to commit 4 more murders after Cleveland tried to attempt calling the authorities on him. So to me, there were signs and there were ways of him getting stopped, even when he first went to jail for indecency in front of kids. The judge said, "I think you have an alcohol problem, so I'm going to give you a chance because you look like my grandson." If he- I don't want to, I'm not even wanting to pull the race card, but reality fact is, somebody who was black was not going to be able to get, 1 year's time and then some hope and decency that you could get yourself together and a second chance by any judge. So, this is him just being in the system, him being who he was, white, him being somewhat normal, that the way he spoke would not alarm anyone or make anyone believe that he was doing such gruesome things. So I can definitely see that. But I did want to share this with you guys. So please let me know what you think. Like, subscribe, and let me know who you would like me to do next.